Okay, so we're going to go over a backgrounder for the haunted band. This is the 219 to 220 megahertz secondary amateur allocation. And there's four parts to this presentation. We talk about the ghost of 219 past and the ghost of 219 present. We invite you to come haunt this band with us. We'll talk about some station and protocol proposals. And then we talk about the future of 219, which is really what this day is about, is this particular workshop, what might need to happen in the future to revive this band. So the FCC allocated 219 to 220 megahertz for amateur use on a secondary basis. So it's only for fixed digital message forwarding, up to 100 kilohertz bandwidth. And amateur stations, just like any other secondary use, they can't cause interference to the primaries, and they must accept interference from primary services in this and the adjacent bands. An additional requirement is that they have to ask permission if within 80 kilometers of an AMTS coast station 30 days in advance. And you have to notify if you're within 640 kilometers. So the ghost of 219 past. So what are the rules? This is a screenshot of the rules in Part 97. It talks about the restrictions on the use in this segment. It's fixed point-to-point digital message forwarding systems. It mentions intercity packet backbone networks. It's not available for anything else. And so part of our discussion today is how do we interpret this in a modern amateur radio context. We can't cause harmful interference to and must accept interference from stations. It's a typical secondary use thing. And the services are specifically AMTS. And you notice that it talks about television stations broadcasting on channels 11 and 13. And those, I believe, are all gone. The television channel thing is not nearly as a big of a problem as it used to be. And then it also mentions other nations and the fixed and maritime mobile services. So these bottom three paragraphs talk about notification and essentially a registration requirement that you have to register your station. You have to notify the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League. And it talks about the geographical limits of the notification for the AMTS coast stations. So that's 640 you have to notify, and within 80 kilometers, you have to ask permission of the AMTS coast stations. And it says at the very bottom that the location of the AMTS coast stations may be obtained as noted in paragraph I-3 above. And this is the ARRL registration. So there's a little bit of a look back up here and see. It says that the location of the coast stations can be found from ARRL, and you have to report your station to ARRL. Okay, that sounds simple enough. So here's just a summary of the geography. You have your GPS location between 80 and 670 kilometers. You have to inform at least 30 days in advance the AMTS coastal station. If you're within 80 kilometers, you have to ask permission. So what is AMTS? It's just the definition. It's a special type of public coast station established in 1981, and this was supposed to serve maritime tugs, barges, commercial vehicles on inland waterways and coast stations, public correspondence service. This never really happened. It does say that the licensees, the AMTS licensees, may lease all or part of their spectrum usage rights associated with the license. This indeed has been what has happened, because the original kind of like point or intention of the rules, the service never really got off the ground. Okay, so in here, this is the part 80. You can see down at the bottom, there's a little note. This is from CFR 80.475B. clearly says that the AMTS licensee has to send notification of the station's location to the ARL. Okay, so just this slide is just to establish that yes, that requirement exists for AMTS. And these are some band plans for this band. It's not in the text-based ARL band plan, but it is in the graphical version. You can see the special orange over there on the right for fixed digital message forwarding systems only. But yeah, not usually in the other band plans that you see that are text listings. Okay, so for the next part, there's a color code here. Um, we have yellows unnecessary, reds not great, tans debatable, and blue should be optional. And these labels will appear later. This is the form for amateur radio stations that want to operate on 219, and it dates back to 1995. This is the current form. This is what you are expected to use in order to inform the ARL before you operate on this band. So these are the pages of the form. There's three pages, boxes that you're expected to fill out, and a signed declaration. Um, you're supposed to agree to this declaration, and then there is a proposed band plan from ARL for 219. 100 kilohertz channels, and it's centered on the following frequencies. Okay, so when we break this down, this form, the white is probably what could be kept without any controversy. There are some unnecessary extra restrictions from ARL that are in here that the FCC did not require. And there's also some things in here that really do need to be opt-in for a public database because the rules do say that this should be a public database. The TAN is debatable whether you need to know height above mean sea level or the transmitter call sign. And there's questions about why. There's things on the form that will change over time. How do you update this form? Do you have to file a new one? Can you just call someone? The whole signed declaration is a little confusing because if you already have your amateur license, you've already agreed to Part 97. And the ARL says it won't coordinate, will not coordinate 219. Yet all of this extra data makes it really feel like they are trying to coordinate something, requiring you to sign a declaration and give lots of information. So this form, our argument is that it could be reduced to the white fields, the things that don't have any colors. And there's a little typo. It's 97.303E, EL. If it got written down in notes, it's easy to confuse those two letters, but that's just know that there's a little bit of a misprint there. Back in 2002, there was a job posting in ARL letter for field organization assistant with duties including the AMTS program for 219 to 220. So there was activity interest from the ARL at least in 2002. But the fact is that there's no activity on this band. There was a group. There was an amateur group active on this band in the 1990s. There were two operators that sent in the form in the early 2000s. One would refuse to give a station location, so ARL did not accept the form. The other was denied permission to operate from the primary because of future expansion. And then in California, we have an interesting situation with this band. The two primaries, one got the A block and one got the B block, and then they started arguing. They split it amongst themselves, and it's been drama in California. So that's the past. The present. So who's the lucky person in charge at ARL? It's Bart Yankee, W9JJ. He's our radio sport and regulatory information manager at ARL. So please be kind to him. He's been good to work with on this, and it's really not his fault. This band is haunted. So we requested AMTS database. The database of AMTS stations was requested. There's supposed to be a publicly maintained database by ARL because we need to know who to notify. And since we have to notify ARL of our station locations, this was the first step, really, to activating. So Bart said to go use ULS, or the Universal Licensing System at FCC. There is no database at ARL. And A related question that we should talk about today is, or that we will talk about today when we kick off our workshop. Does this mean there's no one to notify or ask permission of? So that's, I think, a legit question. So how do you find AMTS stations? Okay, so you can't get a list from ARL. You have to go to ULS, and you can. The advice from Bart Yankee was you could, I mean, you should be able to get it from ARL, but his advice was to use this particular search. He actually gave a screenshot and instructions for ULS um, to set your search up like this, and you will indeed get licenses. You'll get this particular service, the AMTS service. You'll get licenses for that. However, there's problems with this search result. If you put California into the state entry in ULS, it doesn't return stations in California. It returns any record with a business address in California. So stations in California that are operating there but that have out-of-state business addresses will not appear, and vice versa. And ULS can be difficult to use. Understanding the format of what you've downloaded, it takes some time and effort. And no location. There are very few, possibly only one AMTS call signs with tower locations in ULS. So you just have to do your best with these results. You have to learn how to use ULS. You're going to have to figure out how to calculate distances from ULS results. The geospatial ULS search did not work for any of us. And you do have to start asking experts or consultants for help. So here's a header file from ULS. This is what it looks like. These are 25 results. Each row is a individual result. And the header file is really your key to unlock all the other files. The header file field format is given from FCC. They present this to you. They say, here is what all of these things mean. So all of this stuff is set in this field format. There are 50 fields per row, and not all are populated for all services. And amateur radio service header files follow this format too. For each header entry, there's a body of data, and the body of data is distributed across a number of other files. So you can see there are those yellow boxes. That's what we're dealing with something like AMTS. You have a header file which points to all of these other files. So amateur radio ULS structure, I've walked through that before, and it follows this format. So you can see it's a little simpler than the AMTS structure, but follows the same format. So there's a header file that points you to the entities, the HS and the AM files. And so we start to break this down. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to go into detail about this, but these are all the different fields. And everyone has access to this set of slides, so you can pick through it and look at it. It's lots of good information here. Let's see, fixed, yes, we know it's a fixed service. Allows, well, mobile is allowed. So you can see that there's lots of good things in here. Also including demographic data, which there's fields for it. For this particular example, this particular line out of the header file that wasn't reported. You can see the effective dates, pretty recent. Okay, so that's the header file. And then all of these files also have their own formats and their own sets of information. So what you do is you use the header file to figure out which one of these files to look at, which one corresponds to that particular station. So we're interested in complying with the rules as written. So we looked for any call sign with location data. So the only call sign with location data from the California search turned out to be WQI R421. And the only location in this list of locations near my intended station was San Clemente. And guess what? It was 74 kilometers away, which means it's inside of the 80 kilometers must ask for permission boundary. So we know where the amateur station is because it's ours. And the LO file had the tower GPS coordinates. So I just used mapping software. This is how you would do it if you have a licensee, like the call sign, then this is how you look it up. And notice that it's the Southern California Regional Rail Authority, so not a maritime station at all. We'll talk about this. These are locations. This is the actual LO file. And here's a visualization from ULS, and this shows you the locations on a map. This is nice. So like I said, this is one of the very, very few AMTS licensees that populated their record with the locations of their towers. Usually it looks like this. And they're these blocks, these green blocks, that's what they're claiming is their area. And I mean, probably the first thing that you would say is that this inland area does not look like a coastal waterway or anything like that. Pretty much the entire United States is covered by these licenses. So there isn't really any place in the United States at all where you can get 640 kilometers or more away from a station. They're all essentially um, either 80 or yeah, either you're going to have to ask permission or you have to give some sort of notification. Here's the detail of that particular page so you can see, so what does the site actually look like physically? Well, it looks like this. That's the site. That's what and yeah, there's a tower with all sorts of antennas on it. Um, and this belongs to the Southern California Regional Rail Authority. So this is railroad. And you can see there is indeed a rail line right there. If you look towards the middle of the photograph on the right-hand half, you can see that sort of rust-colored railroad. So that's the station that is 74 kilometers away from me. That's what I have. That's why I have to ask permission in order to get on the air. Okay, and there's the point-to-point distance, and this is the line of sight profiler. So Palomar Mountain to San Clemente, California. Now notice there's a mountain in the way, so maybe we should use arguments like, "Hey, you should give me permission because there's a granite cloud in the way, um, and you shouldn't have to worry about me because I'm behind a mountain." So what do we do next? So how do you notify AMTS stations? ARL will not do this for you, doesn't do this for you. But the ARL Council has given some really good advice. So who do you write? How do you ask permission? And how do you notify? And has this ever worked? Well, not yet. People that have asked permission have gotten no because, well, we're going to they're either cite interference, um, or they say that, oh, future expansion, and there hasn't been a lot of attempts lately at all. So there's reasons that we should not do this, and the objections have been brought up, multiple times. Well, there's no live operators in this band. Why bother? Zero activity. Digital messaging, forwarding, packet backbones. Why are you even wasting your time on this? Because their time has come and gone. There's no demand for the one thing that the FCC authorized. Legitimate objection, and we should talk about that today. New band who just, primaries aren't compelled to answer or deny secondary station requests at all. Like they could just simply not ever answer you. And it's not easy at all to figure out who is who at the zoo, to find out who to talk to or who to ask permission of or who to notify. Oh, and you can't, the publicly maintained database doesn't exist. So those are all reasons that we shouldn't do this. And these reasons, honestly, are why there's zero activity on this band. Why should we do it? Well, it's there. We're supposed to activate our bands to the best of our abilities. That's important. And it's dank, but like dank with digital message forwarding now and packet backbones. Think about this. We could have a very innovative reboot of digital links, and it's 56 kilobits per second plus. Okay, not bad. And the 200 megahertz band really is great. It's reliable, it's rain resistant, directional antennas are available. It's got decent range. I mean, this is a really enjoyable band. And hey, if we get this on the air, then this will be a big achievement, and people are going to know who you are if you fill out the form, if we get this on the air, and if we are able to do the things that we kind of want to do today, to really kind of come up with a proposed rulemaking that that has a decent chance of being taken seriously by the FCC. So, what might a station look like? Well, here's a typical. This is going to be an antenna this is 215 to 225 heavy duty Yagi. Uh, and it can handle a lot of power. This is a good one. You get 50 watts on this band. Um, Not bad. So that's what the antenna looks like. Station components, there's a lot of choices here. 219 megahertz capable SDR or a retro radio. Those are your two big choices. Maybe a transverter. You need an amplifier for 50 watts. Good to have an embedded processor computer to control the SDR cables, place to put things. Here's a list of some potential SDR gear. Here's a list of the potential legacy gear. And there's some comments from KB5MU who's on the call. Thank you. And this is some potential gear list. So again, this is all in the slides and the vTools and also distributed on email. And continuation of the potential radio gear. This is all I would say retro or legacy gear, but available. And if a good design is out there, then respinning the board would be doable. Don't forget, you're going to probably need an amplifier. And I say plenty available with a question mark because I did not, amplifiers are not my strong suit, so I did not go track those down. And here is part 4 of our backgrounder. And this is, okay, really, what do we do next? Which is the subject of today's workshop, is what do we do next? Okay, so we take our 100 kilohertz channel band plan, our 100 kilohertz bandwidth, that's FCC rule, and we think bigger. We know that we have no less than 56 kilobits per second that we're dealing with, and this is a great opportunity to take advantage of modern equipment and methods to update and upgrade our digital message forwarding, not your grandfather's packet radio. So that's kind of like the opportunity here. It's already there. We don't need to fight for that. We could deploy 56 kilobit per second digital messaging forwarding stations and packet backbones like we always have. So we could reactivate this band in a sort of a retro computing or retro communications way. Or we can design a whole new type of digital messaging forward station and experiment and all of that. And both of these types can coexist on a real and active 219 megahertz. For that to happen, well, we have to activate it. And if you want to help, go ahead and notify ARL of your intention to operate using the form and tell your ARL technical coordinator, most sections have one, what you're doing. Sort of, let them know. The more they hear about it from more different ways, the more seriously this is taken. Because without potential operators that are putting together stations, we can't start really documenting results of attempts to activate it. All results are good. Even if it's a denial or no response, that actually helps the argument that the current regulations requiring the notification are not working at all. So people get on the ban, that's great. And we already know we have a 100% denial rate so far. So this is where the rules change starts to come up. And the proposing a rules change is the subject of today's workshop, is to actually start kind of poking at the rules and figuring out uh, how to change. And we'll start in 5 minutes. So that's the backgrounder. Thank you, everyone. Is there any questions about the backgrounder?
Hey,
There's
Michelle,
a
I put a
oh,
question in
sorry.
the chat for you.
Oh yeah, there's a question about, is the denial rate 100% since ever? Yes. That at least according to ARL Council, who was involved with this dating back to like the early 2000s, and some more recent uh, news or anecdotes from folks that have tried. So the answer is yeah, the denial rate's 100%. It's you know, um, either the ARL says, no, we're not going to accept your form because you won't tell us where your station is, or the primary cited future expansion. Like, no, we can't afford to have your to have your station on 219 because of potential future expansion, or a pocket veto where there is no response at all.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Just yesterday, I sent two fully completed applications informally to Bart and asked him if he could just take a look at them and see if he saw any glaring errors. I'm okay with providing the station location information and whatever else they ask for, even though I agree with you that it may or may not be necessary. But we'll see. I'm going to give him a couple of days and see what he does. And if I don't get an answer in a week, I'm going to formally submit them by certified mail and copy by fax. And we'll see what happens.
Oh, thank you. That's super helpful because the more we show up and say, yes, I fully intend to operate on the band, then the more likely it is that we will get, you know, increased support from ARL when we go to the FCC with proposed rules, which is what we're talking about doing. So this is sort of a multi-pronged approach. It's increasing the number of people that are trying to use the traditional rules as written, which I assert have really zeroed out activity on the band. The rules are really just too burdensome and not they're not really something you can comply with. You asking permission, you're going to either get no uh, or not an answer. And just the process of registering with a form is often enough friction to where people will not follow through or do it. Let's see, what equipment has been identified for operation in 219, 220? It's in the slide deck. So if you go back a few slides, you should be able to see it. So I'll just go ahead and roll it back here. So here's all the station components, like what might a station look like? This is just a start, but 219 to 220 is well within the reach of a whole lot of SDRs, and there are legacy. There's the potential SDR gear. There's potential legacy gear, and some of this legacy gear is documented well enough for someone to take on the homebrew task or small run task of respinning it. And there's some further potential gear. So it's in the slide deck. Let's see. Any other questions from chat or any other questions from the floor?
One thing I saw, am I coming through okay?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, good to see you. One thing I thought of was the new packet radio by that French ham, I believe, FHD. I'm messing up his call sign. But new packet radio, it was a TDMA point-to-point or point-to-multipoint data link. And I thought that was very interesting because the chip that's in there, they do advertise it as being adjustable. It's a module, really. And the chip can do everything sub-gigahertz. And so it seemed like with a little bit of effort, we could very little bit of effort, adjust it to be 220 compatible.
Oh,
I
good
don't
tip.
the MTR modems as sold today do not support that because they're configured for 70 centimeter as the module, but everything else would seem to work just fine otherwise.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the tip. We'll track it down and put it in the minutes or the notes. And then Don says, for what it's worth, 100 oh 119K2 is being done on 222 megahertz now using thank you. 19 to 19,200 baud, 19.2 baud, thank you. Using the TAIT or TATE TM8200 radios. And his goal is to move that existing operational link down to 219. Okay, well, there's another uh, solution, potential solution. That's a definitely a good tip too. So yeah, we'll gather all of these up and add them to the deck so that folks can see that there are options. Because one of the objections that we do run into and we do have to take head on is the lack of is there any equipment? Are there any radios? How expensive or difficult are they going to be to getting on the air? And honestly, the more solutions that we can document and come up with and point people to, the better. All right, so let's go ahead and start. We're going to start our workshop. And so for those of you joining us, the slide deck, we went over some background information, very beginner friendly for 219 and the issues that And the slide deck that we went over is available in the vTools announcement, also sent out as an attachment. And then the backgrounder as a recording will be edited up separately and posted. So anybody that wasn't able to join us, you can look back and find it. Well, hello everybody, and this is the first public workshop for improving regulations for the 219 to 220 megahertz amateur radio allocation. I'd like to thank ORI, Open Research Institute, and IEEE for making it possible to have this workshop and providing technical, legal, and financial support for this effort. And both organizations have a code of conduct, and that code of conduct is in effect for this meeting. The motivation for proposing new rules to the FCC, it came about from a recent set of proposed rules for a completely different band, the 900 megahertz band. NextNav, a commercial company, proposed a new set of rules for the 900 megahertz band. Now, these rules would center and privilege that company's technology. And ORI replied to the proposal, these proposed rules, along with several other amateur radio organizations. And that rules review process is underway. So our feeling is that if NextNav can be taken seriously by the FCC for essentially a land grab of spectrum, then why can't we do the same thing? Why can't we propose improved rules for everyone on the 219 megahertz band? So this, in the view of many, is kind of a low bar. The 219 megahertz rules have been described as a regulatory failure. They really are outdated and out of step. So they're outdated in terms of the participants, outdated and also out of step and outdated in terms of the current emphasis from the FCC on dynamic spectrum sharing or spectrum sharing in general. The rules as written are possibly moot. And so today we are here to talk about what to do about this situation. So I'd like to open the floor to anybody that has any questions about this first part, like this problem statement that we're here to kind of propose rules. If there's any fundamental objection to doing this, or anything that we missed.
What is it that you think that you can change the paradigm given that we're the secondary users?
That we can propose rules. That's the paradigm change. Since the rules are outdated, possibly moot, that no one can comply with them. That's our assertion, is that this is a process that's open to us as citizens, and we can see that it happens all the time, and we see a situation of regulatory failure. And here is opportunity to propose new rules that will be to the benefit of everybody currently using the band. And Don, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah. Do we see this still as a band used primarily for digital communications, or are we looking for something else here?
That's a really good question. That came up in the local DEF CON group, because it's specifically limited to fixed digital stations and message forwarding. So think of like a packet backbone. That's the situation that we have. That's how we get to use it. And the question was raised to me to why don't we go for mobile? Why wouldn't we, if we're going to go to all the work of proposing rules, why not include you know mobile operation as well? And I thought that was a good question. So when we talk about the parts that are outdated, it's this notification requirement that's a big impediment. That notification requirement, in our opinion, needs to go away. That we're talking about a deletion of the notification requirements, both for these AMTS licensees as well as the amateur stations, and that we can indeed rely upon the secondary user rules, which are you can't cause interference to the primary and you have to accept interference from them. these rules exist all over the place, there shouldn't be an extra burden put on amateur radio in 219 to also notify and ask permission when you just rely on good amateur practice. So, the question raised at the DEF CON group was, well, why don't we ask for more, right? And I think that's what you're kind of getting at, is that is it just for digital? Is it just for fixed stations? Is it just for point-to-point links? So that's a really good question. And then I'm interested if you have a sort of a proposal for how we can use this band, or how you think this band should be used. That if that purpose needs to be edited, then those sorts of proposals are why we're here today.
All right. I know Steve has his hand up, but um, I didn't prepare any sort of proposal, but at this point, I'd be very satisfied if we had the same kind of limitations, meaning it has to be fixed, it has to be point to point, it has to be digital. Steve mentioned channelization is not necessary. I actually agree with that. But if you have two Yagis pointing at each other and your next nearest competitor, we'll call it another station in the band, is 10 miles away, they're not going to hear you. You're not going to hear them. We reuse a lot of VHF and UHF links here on packet here in the Atlanta area on the same frequencies because we know that they don't hear each other provably. So I think that what's there as far as the existing use is fine. I agree. It's that the notification and lack of response is what the issue is.
Yeah, and I think NR0D echoed this. He mentions in chat that we could propose a rule that the primary users must respond within X time period to permission requests, must have actual station locations properly detailed in ULS, and no response should default to allowed operation. And that's like a minimal change sort of proposal that would definitely improve things. It still would require you to go through this extra process that no other band has to do. But I just wanted to make everyone aware that that's on the table here as a point of discussion. And then he says, oh, if we're proposing no requirement, then never mind. But I just wanted to highlight that yes, changing the notification requirement to actually force them to respond, that might not be feasible, but it is that would go a long way towards mitigating the problem. And then Steve says he was going to propose what NR0D said, that the channel should be eliminated since point-to-point can make use of the entire channel. Well, so the channels are from the channel. If you're talking about the band plan from ARL, that's a 100 kilohertz channel, and 100 kilohertz is the bandwidth limit for this particular band.
That whole proposal was predicated around the WA4DSY 56K modem, which at the time required a 100 kilohertz channel. We've got better radios than that now. That should be eliminated. If you've got a point-to-point link in a rural area, you don't need. You can use up to 100 meg or the whole 1 megahertz channel. And there was reference to the new packet radio. If it's given a 1 megahertz channel, it can do 1 megabit per second, which is at the moment, as far as I know, the best we can do.
Yeah, no, I agree. The 100 kilohertz bandwidth is as an artifact of the technology. This is one of the things that the FCC has asked the community to help with, to identify rules that are in there because they're artifacts of a particular technology, a particular radio. It sounds like we have one right in front of us. And the band plans are voluntary, right? So the band plan's not a rule from the FCC. The bandwidth is, but actually, we should address that bandwidth rule with the FCC. It sounds like that's your feeling, is that we should include the 100 kilohertz bandwidth limitation and delete that.
I believe that the 100 kilohertz channelization is in fact in the rules of the 219, the FCC rules of the 219 to 220 band. That was one of the many things that we were suggesting be eliminated in 16-239, which the FCC has yet to rule on for VHF and UHF.
I know that the channelization is in part 80. I don't recall it being in 97, but I think that
It is in 97.
even if it is, then I think that we should we
I,
should seriously consider saying, you know, get rid of this limitation.
I agree. Another comment is that since ORI is in the business of pioneering new technology, I suggest that it create a reference implementation for a 219 to 220 high-speed radio that can optionally use the entire 1 megahertz.
Yeah, I think
There's
we can probably do
Grants are
that.
available.
Yeah. It, we're good with 100 kilohertz, and we're good with one megahertz. We're good with 10 megahertz. So yeah, I think we're game. Um, one of the that's a source of a lot of the interest from the community is because hey, this looks like an underutilized band and very nice channel, already kind of set up for digital. Um, so yeah, I think that they can probably count us in on reference implementations and open source artifacts that'll help people build awesome radios. Let's see. Dawn says, let me back up and make sure I got everybody. And yeah, the point you say, oh, the point to point should be eliminated, allowing for mesh, but I think you could still pull off a mesh network with point to point. You can still consider each of the links to be point to point, and the mesh network, that's a protocol that would be above the physical layer, providing the point to point links. Or do you have a different view?
I agree that a mesh implementation, such as a repeater, would be able to it, if you could put up a high profile site that would allow multiple connections, you could survey and engineer that site so that it could be, in fact, a no, they don't make any distinction between a system that can relay from point to point and and then continue to relay it. It's just a clarification that that them not allowing multi-point is a specious distinction.
Okay, yeah, I follow. Okay, and Dawn says if there's no AMTS operations within 80 kilometers of my station, I don't need a response. I notify everyone, wait 30 days and go. That is correct. That's my understanding of the current rules as written. It will be a challenge to get 80 kilometers away, because I found out where all those map divisions come from. AMTS areas are based on the U.S. Department of Commerce economic areas, which also extends 12 nautical miles off the coast. And as the ARL Council warned, it is essentially the entire United States is U.S. Department of Commerce economic areas. So if somebody has a license, got a license, an AMTS license in that economic area, they've probably leased it out at this point because AMTS is really no more. But it still counts. The notification requirement still counts. So if you can find a if you find a spot in the United States that is further out than 80 kilometers, please let us know because that would be an excellent use case or test case. That would be an excellent thing to go ahead and just notify and then go operate. And then you remark the channels are voluntary and the bandwidth is not in Part 97. Okay. All right.
Real quick, is NR0D coming in okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to test my audio more than anything. I didn't have my headset plugged in. Um, so you're saying that basically at present, every single location that we could contemplate using would be within 80 kilometers of a possible station?
That's what it looks like going to ULS and looking at the GIS version, and like looking at the scattering of all the different licenses across the United States. That's what it looks like right now. And I was warned about this from ARL Council, and it sure turns out to look like that. That the AMTS licenses were divided up into the Department of Commerce economic areas, and that you can see if you go look in ULS. Um, And probably the best way to do it is to kind of approach this as I need to find all of the licenses because the searching by your state will it may give you a false negative. You may seem like there isn't any in where you live, but they may be, and that if you just search by state, then you will get the commercial headquarters
Yeah.
instead of the actual geographic location. So I'm not a GIS expert, but a little bit of GIS trickery in ULS will start revealing that pretty much everywhere in the United States is
Okay.
covered. And if very few licensees list their towers, that
I was going to say,
means
I feel like there absolutely should be then, regardless of anything else, a requirement proposed that every single tower be listed with lat long and power output.
yes, and they're supposed to report the stations to ARL, which I would say means the location. And that was not ever followed through. As far as I know, no company has ever reported the station locations to ARL. So there's no way for you to go to one place and get that information, which is unfortunate, but that's the situation that we have. So firmly agree that yes, they should be reporting their station locations. Very few licensees do. So the one near me did, as you could see on the in the slide deck. Um, and yeah, it's tricky. That means that the argument from the AMTS license holder, whether it's uh, kind of dormant and has just been renewed, which is a pattern that you see. They're supposed to build out these services. They're supposed to build out their network, and if they don't, then they apply for an extension. And a lot of extensions have been applied for. That people will sit on these licenses, and because they can lease them out, they have most often to at least out here in the West Coast to railroads. And the frequencies in were originally by the railroad folks used for positive train control or PTC. That has shifted away from 219. This is an anecdote, and I have not tracked down whether or not this is true for for like all areas or even my area. But the traffic has moved up in frequency. So the PTC people are no longer heavily relying on 219 megahertz either. If you log into a web SDR that has a 219 capable receiver, it is revealing. You will not see a lot of activity at all, even with web SDRs very near 219. So one of the things we should probably talk about, if we wanted to make a full-throated argument to the FCC, would be like, what's the real utilization of this band? Having actual data on well, who's using it? Is it really heavily used? Does AMTS exist? No. Does PTC really need this band exclusively? The and those answers really, I mean, you can make those assertions, but without data to back it up, it's easy to for both the FCC and the primaries to just say no.
I feel like maybe to a little more casual extent, this kind of fairly closely is analogous to the TV white space stuff that was going around.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. And TV also comes up in the rules. There's references to channel 11 and 13, which is no longer a concern anywhere that I know about. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm just saying the TV white space thing, there was proposed requirements. I don't know where it ever went that literally, there was an actual database of who's using what, where, and
right.
your device had to negotiate, et cetera. We don't want to go to that extent, but my main point is I think that it's ludicrous to say we're secondary users and have to get permission when we literally don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean we can tell by tuning in and by looking at web SDRs that
Yeah,
there
but
isn't a lot of activity.
that gets into part 15 kind of things where you just make the
Yes,
statement that, don't interfere and you're good. And if somebody tells you you're interfering, you have to stop.
right. And we don't want to make a similar mistake that NextNav did in their proposed rule, um, making sweeping statements about no amateur activity in 1900 megahertz. So we don't want to do that in order to make make an intelligent case than some actual data rather than eyeball data and anecdote
Yeah.
data or um, the lack of activity can actually you can actually derive some of that from ULS itself. Whether a license is active or not doesn't mean that it's operating on that frequency. But then you can tell that some of these leased licenses, if it's been subleased from there, that gives you even more information. So this is a sort of it is a complicated problem. And when we write proposed rules, simpler may actually be better. So instead of attacking, all of the different aspects that we're talking about today, it's worth saying that we may just simply want to make the argument that there isn't any publicly maintained database, that this has not happened, that the AMTS licensees are no more because the licensees are all it's all leased out to others. AMTS service does no longer exists. Why not just simply narrow the argument and narrow the proposed rule to reflect the current use of the band, which is pretty light from what we can tell, and then just say we would like this notification to go away. That would kind of sidestep the issue of documenting use of the band, which honestly, for especially for spectrum sharing, because that's the big focus of the FCC these days, especially dynamic spectrum sharing, starting to use AIML for figuring out how to share crowded bands. When we talk about spectrum sharing, the sensing part is super important. And it is painfully obvious that hardly anyone has the data. Getting data of usage off of the air is very difficult. You can easily fill up a hard drive very fast, taking IQ samples for any bandwidth of node. And most of the channels that we're talking about are regional channels, maybe even line of sight channels. I think we brought up already the fact that you're going to be using a Yagi antenna here means directional, means usage of the band. Since it's not omnidirectional, it is really difficult to ascertain. This may not be a job that we want to sign up for. Any recording on any SDR at any particular geographical location is extremely limited. It will give you a snapshot of that particular area. That doesn't mean it's a bad approach. It just means that we have to understand that our visibility into the spectrum in a sensing view is very, very limited. This has led to most of the rules at the FCC. The reason why they're interested in this, most of the rules are much more conservative than they have to be in terms of sharing, because the fear of interfering will override just listen, and if you don't hear anything, go ahead and use it for a while approach that the dynamic spectrum sharing people promote. Now, since amateur radio, you're like, well, duh, why wouldn't you just listen first and then transmit? And if it's busy, move to another frequency. Well, we're kind of special. This view of using the spectrum and sharing it and being kind of a good operating practice, that is not universally held sort of practice. That's something that we do as amateurs, and we're set up almost from the get-go to do spectrum sharing. And we have a little bit of a head start. We have a little bit of a head start here. We're already doing spectrum sharing all the time, and it's in our culture and in our rules.
I feel like a first step, real quick. Sorry, Steve. I feel like a first step is pull together in a very rigorous format the data that is available for locations, et cetera, to use as an argument for the proposed rulemaking. I mean, I feel like that's a foundational first step.
Yes, and since we do have the location of a few of these transmitters, putting up a monitoring station near those would probably give us maybe the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah, I'm just talking
way.
about what's available in the FCC database, though, because
there's no usage. Oh, you mean like who's active? Like
yeah, the point is proving,
Yeah.
Having a proof that you're asking us to notify and request permission from statements within 80 kilometers. We literally cannot find out that information. That's clearly not a strategy that is possible.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. All right, let's see.
Steve's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, you are off the top of the screen. Go ahead, and then we'll go back to chat.
There is precedent of this sort of thing from the TAPR Special Temporary Authority for getting spread spectrum rules liberalized. seems to me that we could file an STA with some basic parameters like we're going to listen, then we propose to actually transmit, and we will faithfully monitor a email distribution system that if there is interference reported through official channels, we can get the word out very quickly. Everybody ceases with it, absolutely no more than 24 hours, something like that. Basically give them some assurance that we would behave ourselves responsibly with this experiment. And my understanding is that they're pretty, if you make a reasonable case for an STA and, with reasonable remedy, they don't have a problem granting STAs, especially for limited periods. And we could, start slow, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, something like that. And
Problem
then
here is
going at them.
I don't think that I wonder if the FCC would say there is no STA because you're operating within the parameters of the band.
Oh, that
The
we
STA would be to, kind of operate under the paradigm that we want to do, which is, lack of notification.
Fair.
yeah, yeah, and you can get an STA for operation in a band you would otherwise have access to or otherwise would use if you're doing something kind of out of, I just want to reiterate what Steve's explanation is actually right because we got an STA for space for sounding rocket. And the reason that you have to get an STA in order to operate on 70 centimeters is because of the altitude. So above a certain altitude, that triggered, the extra went through and got a STA, which was granted very quickly. It's very usually a very easy process to get an STA, which stands for Special Temporary Authorization, and it is a really nice thing that ability that we have access to. So yes, I think that is definitely one way to get on the air without having to wait or mess around with the notification requirements. And then we have about the notification requirements. Don says, so is it accepted or agreed that the ARL is not in a position to deliver a list of AMTS stations that we need to be concerned with? And contrary to Part 97303L. And And that is the only way to identify these stations, or that the only way to identify these stations is ULS, which is incomplete at best. And the answer to both of these questions, I believe, is yes. And then Mike says, so given ARL can't provide the list of locations as in the regulation, because the AMTS stations never provided the information to the ARL in the first place, are we sure we're not in compliance by beginning to operate when ARL is unable to furnish those locations? Okay, so it's a good question. If we can't get a list, are we just frozen and can't operate? And that's been the conclusion of individual operators for decades. So we would like to change that. That would we'd like to,
I'd
because
be more willing to make that argument if it wasn't an amateur organization that was deficient.
yeah. So it's disappointing, but I can't really see the ARL cannot force the AMTS stations to turn over the information. And so this would be a regulatory failure. So this is a failed regulation that needs to be either eliminated. This notification requirement isn't working. And it would also be more reasonable to expect that this public database would work if the AMTS service had been commercially successful, if this was being used all the time, that that ships to shore messaging was, and that there were products and that we could maybe even use these radios and kit bash them into the amateur service and everybody would coexist. We see this on other bands. But because the AMTS service never took off, like it wasn't successful, then these licenses are now leased out to totally different services and they have no they may not be, they're like, well, we just leased this license, why would we have to report to the ARL, and so on. So your point's well taken. It's I don't no, the ARL will not give you the list that it does not maintain this public database. I think that is beyond the ARL's control.
But isn't it the fact that The ARRL has requested this info. It didn't get it. And we're supposed to check with the ARRL. So the ARRL can come back to us and say, oh, we do not have any information about this. Go forth.
The ARRL will not tell you to go forth, and the ARRL has not requested the information.
Oh, so they are just sitting on their middleman role.
Yes, and they are not, they specifically say we will not be coordinating. So they're not the coordinator for the band. They are the maintainer of a public database, and it is supposed to be that the AMTS stations are supposed to report to this public database, and that we as amateurs are supposed to report in and send in our forms in order to be part of the public database of amateur operators for this band. This has not been successful, and that is
so part of our ask is to just drop the ARRL out of the process completely.
yes, the notification requirement depends on the ARL maintaining this public database, and since they can't, and since the AMTS service really does no longer exist, then our view is that we should just drop it entirely, not try to fix it, not try to force it to happen. It's tricky to try to put additional requirements on commercial telecommunications companies. So yes, we think that eliminating the notification, eliminating the public database, getting the ARL off the hook entirely may be the easiest, best way to renew interest and activity in this band. And that since we're secondary users and since there are primary users of this band, that we just simply do what we do for every other situation where we're primary or secondary users, that we already know how to behave, that we already know how to respond to, hey, you've interfered with this primary user. So we already have it in our DNA. And that we can rely on this. I think that as operators, good operating practice will make it possible to use the band. The notification requirement, since it cannot be complied with, is a huge impediment. You know, no one has been able to power through it. People that have tried it have not gotten a good result, and it doesn't really take a lot of friction to kind of scare you away from operating on a band, especially one where there's not a whole lot of gear. So yes, that's our recommendation, is that this gets dropped entirely. That's not fixable.
Okay, so effectively drop the entire concept of tracking stations and just say we will listen before, listen for a reasonable period of time, attempt not to, which is kind of the same thing for 60 meters, that kind of thing too, right? So there's precedent for that.
Yes, I would agree. And then Don asks, as I understand it, AMTS stations have it in the rules for the error must be notified. And then yes, it is in the rules. And is this not actionable with the FCC? Okay, so that's an enforcement question. And theoretically, yes. In practice, knowing what I know about the enforcement division, that will not happen, especially if there are no AMTS operations to enforce anything against. And then you're chasing down the who has leased the licenses, and then so yes, that it is it would then be an enforcement issue. It would be I would say it's my opinion. So the fact is, yes, it's a actionable. My opinion is that it would never happen because it would be such a low priority and fairly difficult to sort through all the different license holders. Yes, Part 80 says AMTS licenses must provide notifications to ARL. So that database does not exist because the notifications have not happened. And yes, a good argument for change. And it really, so yes, it comes down to the leasing. And it's a very interesting landscape out there with, like I said, positive train control, PTC, getting some of these licenses and actually getting on the air and doing some PTC work. And what I've heard is that there's been another evolution, because this has been a while. We're talking about AMTS, founded in 1981. And for those of you quick on the math, 1981 was a while ago. And then the different evolutions of train technology. So we're left with license holders that are sitting on licenses with no deployed systems or very few deployed systems. Deployed systems that are totally different from the coastal sort of maritime automatic transmission system that we that we started off with with this rule set. And then Steve says, but isn't it incumbent on the licensee to report the leasing out? It is. And if you're good at ULS, you can actually track all this stuff through the database. So that would be another enforcement question. Like, okay, so the licensee is supposed to report and ensure the kind of the quality of the person that they leased it to comply with the rules. Perhaps. I can't argue with that question. Let's see, last AMTS list I found from ARL. Oh, thank you. Looks like there's a Google Doc in chat. So thank you very much. That would be new information to me because I've never gotten a list or seen one. So yeah, 2003, and that would be about the same time as the amateur that filled out the form and got a no, you can't operate because future expansion, which was in 2002. So yeah, since then, there's been a lot of changes on this band from the commercial side, and that means that I would argue we can't comply with the rules as written, and that
Yeah.
appealing that we should just drop them, that they should be deleted. A deletion is much easier to propose than an addition for lots of reasons, because when you propose new rules, like for instance the next nav uh, notice of proposed rulemaking, when you propose new rules that are impacting multiple of the services or, maybe promoting your own company, your own technology, you will attract a lot of attention. When you say we're just proposing a cleanup or a deletion, then a lot of times politically this can be an easier way of doing it. We did see this a little bit in the symbol rule, symbol rate reduction, symbol rate removal, that if you're deleting, if you're removing a rule, that is more palatable. It can get more traction than to replace it with some other framework or additional rules. So I think we should think real hard about like what exactly in Part 80 and look at Part 80 and look at Part 97 and what we should delete, and then saying we're going to delete 80.375E, something like that. And that may be what we should focus on first, is things that should be deleted, and then a second effort to come back through the draft and look at things that need to be added. Anytime you remove something, there could be inadvertent repercussions, like oops, okay, we deleted this. We actually do need to add something in. Any deletion of the notification requirements will require two different parts. Part 97 needs to be modified, also Part 80, because the ARL notification is in Part 80 as well. Let's see. Don asks, can we say that performing a geosearch in ULS for an 80-kilometer radius from the location means nobody needs to grant permission? Do you think that would hold up in court? If you can show in ULS that there isn't, okay, my argument is a little more maybe pugnacious, but I'm saying if they don't list a transmitter location, then they don't exist near you. And I just, with luck of the draw, was within was 74 kilometers from the only licensee that listed transmitter stations. So lucky me. But yes, I think that if you say, okay, well, you don't have any transmitter locations in ULS, therefore you don't have a transmitter that I can measure to, the closest transmitter is 500 and some odd kilometers away, then yeah, I think it would hold up. It depends on whether or not they accept your argument that the transmitter location is what you should measure to and not the service area or economic activity area of the license holder. So it just kind of depends on how they define the edges of that 80-kilometer. What do they define as location? Does it mean a transmitter location, or is that the boundaries of the license holder's economic area from the Commerce Department?
And that should be clarified in any changes we request. We need to know what the game is before we start playing it.
Yes, that's always better.
I did a bunch of searching in ULS, and there is a tab on there called Map, and it shows you the service area.
Right.
It tells you, yes, this is part of a certain market area, like the Mississippi, lower Mississippi market area, but they're not operating in that. Their maps say that they're operating in this little tiny piece.
Right.
So realistically, we don't care how the market areas exist or not. It doesn't matter. It's what they say there. My concern is that a couple of them, I haven't gone through the whole thing, but I'm suspecting it's about a dozen, just don't have any information at all on the map page. It's missing or it's faulty or something else is defective there, and you can't tell where they are.
Right.
Well,
And
my proposal, I mean, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to notify those people anyway and say, I'm not sure whether you're, there or not, but if you're less than 80 kilometers from my location, you better give me a call because I'm going to start operating in 30 days and see what they say,
that is a one way to do it. So yeah, go see what you can find. And it is true. The
Can you guys bail
data,
me out?
you know what? We'll have your back,
Okay.
regardless, because we are very serious about this band and improving it in every way possible. And it's a multi-pronged approach, and I think everybody that can should be poking around in ULS to see what it looks like near them. And I think that the argument of there's no transmitter location, and you're claiming the entire state of Texas, lol. No, you don't get to say that if without a transmitter location. That means that you are not on this band. You're not operating. You're not saying that there's any location for me to notify.
Keep in
That's a
mind,
legit way to do it. Or you can just notify them and say, I can't really tell. It looks like I'm inside your boundary, but I don't know. I can't tell if I'm 80, 640, so I'm going to operate. Let me know if you have a problem. Now that might be begging for trouble, you know, and
sure.
a lawyer would probably say to not say anything, to not give any notification unless absolutely necessary. And the argument for there's no notification necessary because there's no transmitters near you is a very strong argument.
Some of the licensees do list their transmitter locations, and then they have a much larger area of service. Keep in mind, they're allowed to use um, mobile stations as well, which are not fixed. And so I go by the shaded area of operation rather than if they list fixed transmitters.
Right.
Because a mobile is just as subject to interference as a fixed station, although mobiles tend to have less of an antenna.
Right.
So, but making that error in favor of the licensee whose primary is never a bad choice. But yeah, well, that's it.
Okay. No, I get it. And we'll do all that we can to help you out. All right. So we have other things in chat. Let's see. ARL is the custodian in the FCC rules, not ULS. That's true. Bart Yankee directed me to go look it up in ULS because that's the best advice he could give me, because he doesn't have a database, because he did not get anything
Yeah,
reported
that was
in
just the
from.
response to will this hold up in court? The
Oh,
answer, I think, is no, because the ARRL is specifically listed as the custodian, not ULS.
right. Yeah. And I mean, we could argue that, well, ARL told us to go look in ULS, but that's a pretty weak argument
It
legally.
is.
So yeah. I think
I hope it never comes to that.
yeah. Yeah, well, this is exciting times for sure. And then Eric says the 400-mile distance they specify is a bit cumbersome for non-coastal areas. Yes, it is. That is one of the motivations here. And then Paul says both Part 97 and Part 80 specifically refer to coast stations. I wonder if the stations operated by railroads under leased licenses would be considered to be coast stations. And I think Mike McGinney might have brought this up before. This also got brought up in the DEF CON group, and it also got brought up in RF Hackers, RF Village. That are they still coast stations? They're not. It's so far from the original definition, which is what the rules are still written to support. That it is a very good question, and it's a question I've posed to several different counsels, different lawyers, and gotten different answers. And I think in order to sort this out, we'd have to pay some money to try to untangle it, and that we may be able to avoid having to answer this very good question if we can propose to eliminate the notification requirement entirely. And then Don says there are only about 165 licenses listed in US. Yes, yeah, we wrote a Python script to search through them, and yes, in practice, a lot of information is missing in ULS. It's really hit or miss for all services, and this is because databases of this age and size and diversity are very difficult to maintain. So some information, incomplete information, is prioritized over everybody having the complete and exact information. So yeah, does look kind of messy because large databases like this definitely are messy. There's a couple of licensees who would normally be notified but aren't. But if they don't complain, then is there a problem? Well, no. I would say no. But sort of from a chaotic good, approach to life, you know, I don't think that if they don't complain, then there really wasn't a problem. The concern about interference, I think, is small. And then the market areas are ridiculously large. Yes, they're from the Commerce Department, and that's how they divide up a lot of licenses at the FCC, actually, these economic areas. And then there's let's see, NR0D says there's a possible problem if you get into an NAL situation with a possible 10K or $10,000 fine. That's the thing that stops people. Yes. Yes. Regulations there are repercussions for not following the regulations.
I mean,
Usually,
I would caution people that things like positive train control getting interfered with is not a good look.
right. Exactly. Then let's see, Eric says for the STA or special temporary authorization, they will probably want a phone number for a stop buzzer. And also, yes, that's true. And also the STA should probably not specifically mention Part 97 or amateur radios. They will likely reject it and tell you to use that service instead. Well, maybe, because if you're saying, okay, we're doing an experiment to drop a particular part of the rule, just like with the space mission that we did, or the Open BTS operation many years ago, Burning Man, so it probably wouldn't reject it out of hand. They may just they may tell you how to modify your STA. But yes, your point about having a phone number or a way to stop it, that's a requirement. For example, for anything on board the sounding rocket, it needed to be controlled at all times. Like if we tell you to turn it off, you need to be able to turn it off like immediately. And yes, there will be a phone number and a person that's asking for that. There will be somebody that has to raise their hand and say, I'm going to be legally responsible for the STA. Or I would be happy to do that. And then NR0D says we should be serious. This was the cruddy consolation prize we got. Yes. So if you're not familiar with the history of 219 up to 222 plus, then this band was what we got when UPS, United Parcel Service, took 220 to 222 from us and then never used it. And if you're not familiar with the history of that regulatory process, that I would argue that's another example of some regulatory failure, because the UPS wanted to use 220 to 222, and then the regulations in the process took so long, and they viewed the rules as so onerous and not what they wanted, that they moved, I believe, to Nextel, and then moved on to the next thing after that. So there's bands right by this one. We're talking about 219 to 220, but 220 to 222 is also haunted. And then as Steve Stroh says, disagree with mentioning Part 97, and that's referring to the STA, because we're inherently experimental and not for profit. It's true, if you don't mention Part 97, it might come across as if we were some sort of commercial outfit trying to do things, make it work for the allocation. Then we might have the capability to continue our sharing back into 220 to 222. So I would say yes, if we make a strong argument and get taken seriously about 219 to 220, then we can leverage those good results, showing that we are a solid, good service with activity, innovative, interested in spectrum sharing, that we then can go back and get something that we lost, that a lot of people are still very grumpy about. At this point, I wouldn't mind us seeing 220 to 222 return to secondary status from Eric. Yeah. Yeah, vehicle to vehicle use. Data only. Though, so there's a vote for data only because that's the current hotness, and we've got plenty of other capabilities for voice. Yes. I haven't heard anybody ask for, like, should we just make it voice band, like all the other nearby bands. I'm very, very pro digital. That's all I do. And I have I see no problem with continuing the data only.
I mean, we have 3 megahertz on 222. I feel like it's not worth going down that path personally.
Okay.
And I agree with that sentiment.
Okay.
I think it needs to be stated that it's data, because in many, many folks' minds, digital equates to digital voice.
True. In order to
True.
get digital voice, I think we would have to ask for something different, right? Because that would be a different.
There's no, if it's data, then we can easily pass a voice packet over such a network,
Yeah.
even in real time. So, but calling it digital equates in a lot of people's minds to digital voice.
Yeah,
They
that's
just
true.
don't recognize data.
Correct. Yeah, this is definitely data, and they even talk about, any unspecified code. So it's definitely allocated as data. And yes, it's a good reminder to use the right vocabulary for this because it makes a difference. Let's see. Dawn says ULS GeoSearch is limited to 219.9 kilometers radius. If only that was, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Because it is, when you do GeoSearch in ULS, there are some limitations. And like I said a little bit earlier, not being a GIS expert, I had a lot of trouble getting ULS to cough it up. So once I found a licensee that had the actual GPS coordinates, then I just took it to a completely different program to get those results in the slide deck. I was never able to get ULS to kind of return any sort of point-to-point distance. So if somebody is good at that, knows how to do it, it'd be good for you to be in touch. And Paul says amateurs don't need an airtight defense. You just need a solid argument that you acted in good faith and cooperated immediately when the issue was raised with you. And yes, lots of thumbs up on that one. That is true, and that's something we fully intend to continue to comply with. That sort of that's good ethics and good operating practice. Eric says the state. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, real quick. I thought you were done. Do we know that 219 to 220 is being used for positive train control? Because when I Google, I see a whole lot of 217 to 219.
Yes, there's some. That's what I was told. And then
Okay,
doing a search, it's all over. That
fair
is
enough.
from 217 all the way, because 217 to 219 is actually the original license band. So
Right.
our secondary allocations kicks in at 219.
Yeah, but I'm saying from 219 to 220 is what we have.
Yes, that's what we
The,
have.
the
Oh, so
links might not be simplex.
they're saying 217 to 219 inclusive of 219, possibly.
Possibly. But without actually like I guess this would be a
Listening,
good
etc.
yeah, without doing like an exhaustive search. So Python's really the right tool for the job there when you deal with like get down. You have to construct the right search and then download it, and then somebody has to go through like the footnotes to make sure that you captured everything. But my understanding is that there was positive PTC in 219 to 220, but that's that's somebody that's telling me this over either at DEF CON or one of the
Okay.
local groups. So good point. We may not have to worry about it at all if we can show that um, there isn't any activity at all. It's all below 219. That would be really helpful. And then Eric says the state commuter rail here has recently licensed 1.25 meters, which is 219, roughly 219 for PTC, though I haven't heard anything on air yet. And I believe they will be using, I don't know, I'm not familiar with this. It's WobTech I-ETMS. And then that was the case with 8-meter experimental licenses, though I guess an STA isn't exactly the same as P5, talking about the rejection of applications. So yeah, Eric, if you want to tell us a little bit about WABTech, I-ETMS, because I'm not familiar with that. And then Eric also continues with free DV for free digital voice or SIP over packet shouldn't be an issue. There are 500 kilohertz blocks licensed for huge swaths of the state. Yes, yes, there are. Uh, Pretty much every metro area has these enormous swaths.
Yeah, so the web text just another standard for PTC or automatic train control systems. I think it's IP based, but then it has other layers for the RF.
Okay, thank you so much. That's very helpful. And yeah, the for 219, even with the 100 kilohertz bandwidth, this is a really nice bandwidth for some of the ORI protocols. Opulent Voice is about an 81 kilohertz occupied bandwidth, and it's a digital mode. So, and there's others out there too. So we have lots of things that we could be putting on this band if it was uh, easier to operate. And then in the chat is a link from Eric on the interoperable electronic train management system. So thank you. All right, so we have a few minutes left in our time. Anybody that hasn't commented, would you like to share anything that you may have about the subject or any questions about any of this?
Will the primer slide deck be posted anywhere?
Oh, yes, it was sent out as an email attachment. It's in the media section of the vTools. And then I will, when we follow up with sort of a summary of action items and a potential draft, some draft changes based on the consensus achieved today, then the slide deck will be attached again.
So I think in terms of steps, I feel like steps are prove that the current existing situation is not working vis-a-vis there's no database, the ARRL is not doing their thing, nobody's reporting to the ARRL, all those things, to have that in our back pocket. Next step would be site 60 meters and things like that for amateurs are very good at listening before they talk and responding quickly to requests to stop and interference complaints and things like that. I feel like we need to be as certain as we possibly can be of what the current traffic, at least from a database standpoint, is in 219 to 220, because as I said, I shudder to think about us interfering with a positive train control system, even for a small period of time. That'll
Yeah,
hit the news. Who knows?
right. Well,
Um,
point very well taken.
And then I think there's something here too about this whole coastal thing that it's cited as coastal, but we're getting the sense that it's not really coastal and it's not about boats anymore and things like that, just to drive home the fact that this is all completely and utterly a joke at this point and needs to be revamped because it does not reflect reality in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Strongly agree.
And then
In
move on from there to what we want to do, which is listen before we talk and respond to and be a good secondary user as we've proved we can do on other bands. I mean, for that matter, 70 centimeters with pave pause and things like that, same deal.
Yeah, there are a lot of other examples of coexistence with other services that we can
Yep.
use
Point two.
as examples, as evidence in this section. So I've been keeping track, and that will be like a section 6.
Yep.
So, and then I would assume like we would in this draft we would also say, okay, here's the things we could be deleted. That the deletion of these current rules would then result in this a better set of regulations for the
And then
band.
I'd be interested to hear what other people say, but I don't think it's a good idea to even contemplate saying something like we would like to use the entire 1 megahertz at a
Yeah.
given station.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could throw in deleting the bandwidth limit without
True.
making any comments about it. Just remove it because
that's
it's an
fair.
unnecessary, very old sort of. I think Steve was the one that pointed out it's actually based on equipment. It's an equipment
Yep.
limitation. And
Yep.
when those things they do get into the rules, not just at the FCC, but they get into all sorts of regulatory expressions all over, the government. And at the very least, the FCC is now much more focused on making sure that the rules aren't technology dependent, that they aren't doing that anymore. And so either deleting it with a comment quoting the FCC's vision statement, quoting their guidance, quoting the NIST guidance,
That could be good.
that would that would really click with the current FCC, in my opinion. We could also delete it without saying anything at all, um, or or just leave it for now. Um, I would I would say we should probably d think about doing everything at once. Like maybe not to recommend an overreach, but we may only get one crack at this.
That's fair.
So, and the draft, the construction of the draft, which I'm going to be heavily relying on all of you that have expressed interest in this meeting, the people that will come to future meetings, because this will take a couple rounds to do. All the people in the ORI community, any other community that wants to help with this, this will be, we're going to have to do a really good job of like following through. I think the outline that you've proposed is an excellent start. So it'll be in the minutes of the meeting, and you'll start seeing proposed draft. This is a really good outline. Don't see any troubles with it. We should, anything that like I said, deletions are easier to get than additions. And if we can pull off what we want by just removing regulations in 80 and 97, then that would be great. If we discover some sort of trouble with it, then we'll have to talk about it and draft it carefully to make sure that anything that we propose is to the benefit of everybody. All right, any last questions or comments?
What are next steps meeting wise? I'm not sure I'm clued in on that. I'd be interested if I can make the time, if the time works for me and further contribute.
Yeah. Oh, and thank you for asking. Not the next meeting hasn't been scheduled yet. This particular time slot is our usual weekly ORI FPGA meetup. But I do understand it is tricky for people that work for a living, that have a day job. So we'll try to have the next meeting probably a month from now would be a good
Okay.
rule
And
of
you'll
thumb to start
email
work.
this current attendee list.
Yes, the current attendee list will definitely be notified. It'll be it'll be in association with IEEE, so it'll be reservations through vTools again, and recorded and posted. And we'll just do our very best to make sure that all of the discussion is as open as possible to as many people as possible.
Sounds
Uh,
good.
yeah, and we'll give enough notice to where the folks we can spread the word, and schedules can. And if you have a proposed time that would be better than 10 a.m. U.S. Pacific on a Tuesday, then just please let me know, and I'll do all that I can to make it easy to attend. Let's see, there are a few additional questions. Broadly needed monitoring to understand what's actually there. Yes, that's a truism.
I
Pretty
think
much
that is a good
this.
point. Could we put out a call? I mean, it might be worth possibly putting out a call to the amateur community to say, hey, anything you can do to start monitoring 219 to 220 would be great.
I think it's achievable, and yes, I think a call would be good, a call for monitoring. It is an impossible job to get a full picture of 219 everywhere.
Sure.
But we can do a decent job of major metropolitan areas, anybody that can find one of these stations, especially next to the trains, because the argument that I would say is that if we're directional, fixed point-to-point links, then we can uh, go a long way towards reassuring any train interference that you're just never going to hear us because it's a directional antenna, it's 40 dB down or whatever. So if we can show the activity, and like, okay, but guess what? We're never going to point at you. Then I think that would go a long way towards reassuring
Yeah.
people if we ever have to take that step.
You bring up a good point, and somebody mentioned mobile, and I have a feeling that could be a bit of a minefield.
It can.
From a response standpoint. Well,
Yeah.
point to point is one thing, but this mobile free for all,
Yeah, that's a good point. And let's see, there was questions about vTools. So if you're not familiar with the vTools from IEEE, it's short for volunteer tools, and it's how we do all of our um, event organization and elections and all of the different logistics. So the vTools page, it's like an event page, event management page. It says it did not include any links to the primer presentation. It should be in the media section. Oh, okay. So yeah, that just in case anybody else had difficulty finding it, I think it's at the bottom right hand of that page. So what we try very hard to do is when we use vTools is to upload artifacts of the meeting, agenda, any sort of slide deck presentation so that it's all in one place. And Eric asked, is interference on 60 meters reported to ARL? Does anybody know the answer to that question off the top of their head? I know 60 meters has some interesting rules. I think I've operated it like twice.
Sorry, I got distracted for a second. What about 60 meters?
Is interference on 60 meters reported to the ARL?
No, not that I'm aware of. It's just a general report to the FCC kind of thing, as far as I know.
Okay.
I can guarantee you the ARL does not have a resource set up to do 60-meter monitoring, etc.
Okay, because I know it's,
At best,
it's
the
special.
field observer program.
Right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know that, 60 meters is kind of a special case with the channelization and some additional rules. But yeah, I don't think it looks like there's no reporting to ARL. And
Official observers, that's what I was looking for. The official observer program would be the best, closest thing, I think.
Thank you. And then Eric comments, there are a few coordinators for AMTS like Access 220/MXV Rail AAR. I believe they are handling the inland leases these days. Okay, thank you. That's a good to know.
That's worth following up on.
Yes, it is. Yeah, thank you. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you for hanging out and talking about this. We'll close the meeting. I'll make one last call for any comments or questions, and then we'll post the recording. So if you know somebody that might be interested in the subject, might want to help out, then please let them know. So any last comments or questions?
Good start.
All right, thank you. Thank you
Thanks for
very much.
coordinating.
You bet.
Thank you, Michelle.
Happy to
We
help.
really appreciate your taking this by the horns. Thanks.
You bet. No, happy to help. Looking forward to the whole process. It will be long, and I'm sure there will be some very tedious parts, but we're very much looking forward to this because the benefits are pretty clear. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Hey!